Title: Pericles' Funeral Oration, The Ideals and Reality of War. Introduction. Introduce Pericles' funeral oration, delivered in 431 BC after the first battles of the Peloponnesian War. In this speech, Pericles honored the Athenian soldiers who had fallen in battle, using the opportunity to extol the virtues of Athenian democracy, civic pride, and the commitment to freedom. State the thesis. While Pericles' funeral oration offered an inspiring portrayal of Athenian ideals, the subsequent events of the war would reveal the harsh realities of conflict, exposing a gap between Athens' self-image and the toll that war would take on its citizens and values. Section 1. The Ideals of Athenian Democracy and Civic Pride. Pericles' vision of Athenian exceptionalism. Describe how Pericles portrayed Athens as a model city-state, one that embodied democracy, freedom, and the active participation of citizens in governance. He presented Athens as a society that valued its people and enabled all citizens, rich or poor, to have a voice in the assembly. This vision of Athenian democracy emphasized civic pride and unity, suggesting that all Athenians shared a duty to defend their city and its ideals. Pericles framed Athens as unique among Greek city-states, holding up its values as a source of strength and resilience. A call to civic duty and sacrifice. Pericles' oration celebrated the virtues of bravery and sacrifice, honoring those who had fallen in battle as heroes who exemplified Athenian values. He portrayed their deaths as noble acts in defense of freedom, urging living citizens to uphold this legacy. He emphasized that true honor lay in placing the city's needs above personal interests, creating an idealized vision of civic duty where every Athenian would willingly sacrifice for the greater good. This call to sacrifice reinforced the idea of a collective identity, uniting citizens under a shared purpose. Section 2. The Contrasts and Realities of the Peloponnesian War. The ideal of unity versus the reality of division. Although Pericles praised the unity of Athenian society, the Peloponnesian War soon exposed divisions within Athens. The pressures of prolonged conflict led to political tensions, with factions disagreeing over strategy and the costs of war. Some leaders, like Alcibiades, advocated for aggressive expansion, while others argued for caution and peace. Additionally, the democratic ideals celebrated by Pericles were challenged as influential orators swayed public opinion, sometimes leading Athens into risky endeavors. The internal conflicts that emerged highlighted the limitations of Athenian unity and democratic decision-making in times of crisis. The ideal of civic responsibility versus the plague and moral decline. Shortly after Pericles' speech, a devastating plague struck Athens, killing thousands, including Pericles himself. The plague caused a breakdown of social norms, as citizens became more focused on personal survival than civic responsibility. The ideals of honor, duty, and sacrifice that Pericles praised were overshadowed by fear, suffering, and despair. This period of hardship revealed the fragility of the civic values Pericles had celebrated. The plague and the stresses of war led to a moral decline, as many citizens abandoned traditional values, and Athens struggled to maintain the vision of collective purpose that Pericles had promoted. Section 3. The Costs of Imperial Ambition and the Decline of Athenian Ideals. The Sicilian Expedition, the Reality of Overreach. Pericles' speech presented Athens as a defender of democracy and freedom, yet the reality of Athenian imperialism often contradicted these ideals. The Sicilian Expedition, a failed military campaign to expand Athenian influence, epitomized the dangers of overreach. This costly defeat drained Athens' resources and weakened its military, straining the very unity and pride that Pericles had celebrated. The expedition revealed the darker side of Athenian ambition, as the quest for power ultimately led to overextension and a lack of strategic foresight. This loss signaled a turning point, as the ideals Pericles espoused clashed with the harsh reality of imperial pursuits. The shift from democracy to authoritarianism in times of crisis. The pressures of war led to shifts in Athenian governance that undermined democratic principles. After major defeats, the Athenian assembly became more susceptible to manipulation by powerful individuals, leading to brief oligarchic coups, such as the rule of the 400 and later the 30 tyrants, which undermined the democracy Pericles had praised. These internal shifts exposed the fragility of Athenian democracy under stress. As fear and desperation grew, Athens increasingly abandoned its democratic ideals, resorting to measures that conflicted with Pericles' vision of open, collective governance. Section 4. The legacy of Pericles' oration and the lessons of the war. Pericles' speech as an enduring ideal. Despite the gap between Pericles' ideals and the realities of war, his funeral oration remains a powerful articulation of democratic values and civic pride. It inspired generations of Athenians and later civilizations, reinforcing the idea of citizenship as a shared responsibility and sacrifice for the greater good. The speech represents an aspirational vision of Athens, capturing the spirit of democracy at its height. Even as Athens faced decline, Pericles' words continued to serve as a model of what the city once represented and what democratic societies could strive to achieve. The reality of war's toll on society and values. The Peloponnesian War ultimately revealed how sustained conflict can erode the ideals that a society holds dear. The prolonged hardships led to a breakdown of Athenian unity, morality, and democratic principles, demonstrating the corrosive effects of war on social cohesion and values. The disconnect between Pericles' vision and the reality that Athens endured offers a lesson on the limitations of ideals in the face of prolonged conflict. The war illustrated the challenges of maintaining civic pride, unity, and democracy under duress, highlighting the costs of imperial ambition and the risks of overestimating a society's resilience. Conclusion. Pericles' funeral oration captures the democratic ideals, civic pride, and sense of duty that Athens held at the beginning of the Peloponnesian War. His speech offered an inspiring vision of Athens as a city worth defending and a model of freedom and unity. However, the prolonged conflict and its associated hardships exposed the challenges of upholding these ideals. The plague, political strife, and costly defeats such as the Sicilian expedition revealed the limits of Athenian unity and the strains that war placed on democratic values. In the end, Pericles' oration remains a testament to Athens' aspirations, even as the reality of the war fell short of these ideals. The speech endures as a reminder of the power of civic duty and democracy, but also of the potential for war to erode a society's principles. The experience of Athens serves as a cautionary tale. Introduction. Pericles' funeral oration, delivered in honor of Athenian soldiers who had died in the early battles of the Peloponnesian War, became one of the most influential speeches in history. Pericles used this occasion to celebrate the democratic values, civic pride, and resilience of Athens, framing the city as an exemplary society where citizens shared a deep commitment to their city's ideals. Yet, as the war dragged on, the contrast between these ideals and the harsh realities of conflict grew increasingly apparent. This essay explores how Pericles' vision of Athenian democracy and unity, as laid out in his oration, clashed with the brutal and disillusioning experiences that Athens faced during the war. Section 1. The ideals of Athenian democracy and civic pride. Pericles' vision of Athenian exceptionalism. Pericles' speech presents Athens as a model of exceptionalism, where democracy is not only a political system but a moral ideal that brings out the best in its citizens. He emphasizes that Athenians are engaged, educated, and loyal to their city, contrasting Athenian democracy with the oligarchic systems of rival city-states like Sparta. Athens, in Pericles' view, is unique in its ability to blend strength with cultural and intellectual excellence, portraying the city as both a powerful military force and a beacon of freedom. This idealized vision provided Athens with a moral justification for its actions, including its imperial pursuits. By framing Athens as an enlightened and free society, Pericles implied that the spread of Athenian influence was beneficial not only to Athens but to all Greeks. This concept of Athenian exceptionalism became a rallying point for the democratic faction, strengthening their resolve to defend Athens at any cost. A call to civic duty and sacrifice. Pericles calls on Athenians to embrace their civic duty and honor the sacrifices made by fallen soldiers. He suggests that there is no higher calling than to defend Athens and its values, presenting the idea that true greatness comes from putting the needs of the city above one's personal interests. This rhetoric not only glorifies those who died in battle but also calls on the living to continue the fight, framing war as a noble act of service. Pericles' call to sacrifice and civic duty was intended to unite Athenians in the face of hardship. By appealing to collective identity and shared values, he created a sense of unity that helped Athenians accept the burdens of war. However, as the war continued, the cost of this idealized vision of duty and sacrifice would become increasingly difficult for ordinary Athenians to bear. Section 2. The contrasts and realities of the Peloponnesian War. The ideal of unity versus the reality of division. Although Pericles promoted a vision of unity, the strains of a prolonged war exposed divisions within Athenian society. As the war dragged on, differing opinions emerged over the best course of action. The Democratic Assembly, driven by persuasive orators and popular opinion,